Snow covered everything in white. A freezing gust from Cook Inlet whipped across Anchorage Airport's runway 4R on a moonless night, when a single fleeting second suddenly tore through the silence. A deafening explosion shook the ground. A column of black fire surged above the icy snow, casting an eerie orange glow onto the thin mist as if someone had just cracked open the gates of hell. Right next to it, a Boeing full of passengers was still revving its engines, waiting to take off. The cabin plunged into chaos under the red flashes, yet no one could grasp how close they had come to the blade of death. And then, stranger than the explosion itself, came a massive silence. Air traffic control cut all communication. Radar stations went black. Security forces stormed in and slammed shut every gate. Anchorage, the bustling transit hub of the North Pacific, suddenly turned into a forbidden zone. The accident happened without warning, but the response from the U.S. Navy was immediate and silent. What exactly was happening beneath the ice that forced the government to issue a lockdown without hesitation? Ted Stevens Anchorage International isn't just an airport, it's the main nerve line feeding Alaska. According to Airports Council International, in 2024, this airport processed more than 3.7 million tons of cargo, ranking 4th in the world. Its location, right in the sky corridor between Asia and the Americas, makes it a massive refueling station. 747s, 777s, and 667s. Stop for about 90 minutes to refuel, swap crews, offload semiconductor chips or vaccines, then jet off to Memphis, Incheon, or Los Angeles. According to the Alaska Department of Transportation, this operation generates $2.3 billion in revenue and more than 26,000 jobs for the state. If the flow halts, supermarket shelves in Seattle go empty of fresh produce, and factories in Korea run short of critical components within a day. On a typical day, over 300 takeoffs and landings happen even in -20-degree winds. Planes carry fruits, antibiotics, and oil drilling equipment to frozen towns, then fly out with boxes of frozen salmon bound for Tokyo. To major express delivery firms, Anchorage is the only pivot hub close enough to the pole to shorten trans-Pacific routes to under 10 hours. Runway 4R is like a highway in the sky. Just one long skid mark can throw the entire North American supply chain off rhythm. In the early hours of December 23, 1983, that fear became reality. Korean Air Flight KE-084, a 250-ton DC-10, got lost in the fog and lined up on the wrong runway. Instead of 32, the pilots were heading for 06L. As they throttled up, the center landing gear snapped. The aircraft twisted sideways and slammed into a Piper PA-31 carrying 8 people waiting for takeoff. Flames shot higher than the control tower. 6 people were injured. 2 fuselages burned to the frame. Fire crews fought for 16 hours. Anchorage had to shut down the entire runway system. Over 100 flights were canceled or rerouted, right during peak Christmas travel. Disaster upon disaster. Just 4 days earlier, a cargo 747 landing in the same fog had plowed into a pickup truck measuring runway ice. An auxiliary fuel tank exploded. 2 technicians were severely burned. The airport shut down for another 6 hours. These back-to-back blows made logistics experts call it the canyon effect. A small crack in Anchorage sent shockwaves across both hemispheres, from flu vaccines stuck in Chicago to delayed frozen salmon shipments in Tokyo. When the smoke cleared, the Federal Aviation Administration issued an emergency directive. All ground vehicles must have active GPS units. Pilots must verify runway headings on digital maps before throttling up. Over 2,000 meters of fog-penetrating LED lights were installed. Ground radar now refreshes every 60 seconds. Anchorage even built an ice warning center, ready to shut down if visibility drops below 400 meters. These layers of defense have kept America's frozen heart beating to this day. But the explosion in that winter night of 1983 still lingers, a reminder that a single careless moment could freeze the entire bloodstream of a continent's logistics. Just minutes earlier, Anchorage had been as bustling as usual. Then came a sharp, deafening noise, and everything froze still, as if suspended in the middle of an Arctic winter. On the edge of runway 7L, a Korean Airlines DC-10 weighing over 200 tons began swaying, its center landing gear collapsing. The fuselage twisted into a whirl of sparks as it skidded over 600 meters, before ramming straight into the approach lighting system, colliding head-on with a tiny Piper PA-31, awaiting takeoff clearance. According to the NTSB report dated August 9, 1984, the flight crew lost orientation in thick fog, mistakenly selecting the wrong runway, and in that instant, the ice turned into a blazing forge, burning both aircraft fuselages to ashes in under 5 minutes. 6 people were injured, and the entire runway lighting system was destroyed. Silver-colored fire-suppressing foam sprayed from ARFF cannons immediately crusted into white scabs due to temperatures plunging to -18. The blend of black smoke and frost formed a salty, acrid mist blanketing the entire airport. Firefighters had to use axes to break through hardened foam blocks just to reach the cockpit, while chemical tanks constantly jammed because their nozzles were iced over. Just 30 meters away, Alaska Airlines Flight 58, a fully loaded 737 poised to launch into the Christmas night, was holding its brakes at the top of 7R. Captain Gary Lewis switched on the landing lights, shining them straight into the wall of fire, trying to judge whether he had time to throttle up and dodge, or whether he should shut off the engines to avoid sucking flames into the combustion chamber. On emergency frequency, the controller's voice shouted amid the blare of sirens, but the ground radar was already scrambled by heat and smoke, causing scan delays of up to 3 seconds. In that chaos, any misdirected instruction could turn the runway into a second battlefield. Lewis decided to cut the bleed air, shut fuel valve number 2, and wait. That life-or-death moment felt like an eternity. But it was 3 slow, steady breaths that saved 142 lives from a firestorm. In 2024, a front landing gear collapse of a King Air at the same airport was described by Anchorage Daily News as gliding like figure skating, because the pilot calmly teased the throttle and circled to dump fuel before landing, avoiding any explosion entirely. Eerily, the same lesson echoed nearly 40 years earlier when Lewis had to wager his life on that same calm. As emergency crews battled the blaze, a series of fuel tankers at the logistics terminal were evacuated. Just one spark could have ignited 200,000 liters of Jet A fuel, turning Anchorage into a fortress of black smoke. The FedEx Logistics Depot at the North Terminal was also immediately locked down, because its shipment of lithium-ion batteries bound for Osaka had the potential to trigger a chain reaction of explosions with any vibration. KTVA's emergency broadcast at 0016 stated that within just 8 minutes, the Federal Aviation Administration activated a ground stop nationwide for ANC, shutting down the entire 50 nautical mile airspace, cutting off a critical freight route between Asia and North America right at the peak of Christmas season. At the same time, UPS's Logistics Forecasting Center in Louisville issued a chain break warning, since every hour Anchorage was paralyzed meant 1,700 tons of frozen goods, vaccines, and semiconductors were left idle in minus 35 degrees Celsius cold storage, exceeding the safety threshold of 18 hours. The fire was finally contained at 2:38 a.m. Although no one was killed, the runway surface had been seared into slush, then froze again like shattered glass, forcing cranes to drill bolts into anchors just to extract the DC-10 wreckage from the lights. 6 hours of disruption along the North Pacific cargo artery, and insurance companies estimated damages up to $112 million, making it the most expensive non-fatal aviation accident since September 11th. But the more terrifying number was that 30-meter gap, which separated two fuel explosions from merging into a massive fireball. Had Alaska Airlines Flight 58 throttled forward at the exact moment radar flickered, 142 passengers and their 70,000 liters of Jet A fuel might have turned the event into America's worst aviation disaster since September 11, 2001. A haunting question lingered over the ashen ice. Could half a second, an extra or missing decision, have rewritten U.S. aviation history? And why does a system deemed the most advanced still rely on the final calm breath of a human being? Just minutes after the explosion, Anchorage Tower issued a ground stop across all frequencies, meaning every aircraft within a 50 nautical mile radius had to divert away from the airspace, and incoming planes were forced to continue to Fairbanks or Seattle. This was no ordinary airport. Data from Airports Council International ranked Anchorage fourth in the world in 2024 for cargo volume, handling over 3.69 million tons, just behind Memphis in the U.S. In winter, AIAS's annual report recorded an average of 140 cargo landings per day, carrying semiconductor parts, vaccines, and even frozen Alaskan salmon. When the lockdown was issued, within just 8 seconds, hundreds of millions of dollars in freight flow came to a screeching halt. Hundreds of pilots flying on reserve fuel had to divert, creating backlogs all the way to Calgary and on to Portland. The domino effect exploded beyond state borders. The more planes turned around, the fewer containers got loaded on the ground. Within 6 hours, FedEx's cold storage management system in Seattle reported overload, forcing them to move 40 tons of flu vaccine to long-haul trucks instead. These ground routes span over 3,000 kilometers and cut through ice-covered mountain passes, pushing delivery times to at least 3 days. Anchorage Daily News had warned back in 2021 that just 48 hours of supply chain interruption could choke the salmon export terminal at Dutch Harbor due to a shortage of refrigerated containers, causing a 15% drop in seasonal revenue. This time, the number shortened to just 18 hours because Christmas was near, and every conveyor belt was maxed out. About 400 miles from Anchorage, the city of Fairbanks, used to receiving only 4 cargo flights per night, suddenly had to handle 5 times that volume. Runways froze, baggage carts were overloaded, and its outdated radar system glitched, echoing the same chaos from the 1983 collision when 3 seconds of interference nearly killed 12 people. Express shipping firms had to urgently hire civilian snowplows to expand makeshift parking space. But by sunrise, static electricity froze fuel lines, forcing at least 6 planes to take off without topping off their tanks. In Alaska's far eastern region, the consequences were even more tangible. 26 indigenous communities on the Aleutian Islands rely entirely on air transport for fresh food and diabetes medicine. City News reported that a woman in Utqiagvik once had to drive 2 hours on an icy temporary road just to get 3 bags of apples and antibiotics after local carrier Raven Air went bankrupt in 2020. Today's incident replayed that scenario. The Federal Relief Warehouse in Anchorage couldn't lift off, forcing clinics across the Arctic Circle to stretch out antibiotic treatment, and food reserves meant for 7 days dropped to 5. Seattle, stuck at the far end of the supply chain, was hit with a double shock. Around 4,777 flights scheduled to land in Anchorage had to be rerouted, but SeaTac was already full due to a South Pacific windstorm. At 3:42 a.m., UPS's Service Alerts channel announced that all packages on the Asia-North America route will be delayed no less than 48 hours due to Anchorage congestion. Retailers were forced to invoke force majeure clauses, canceling Christmas orders. Whole Foods alone lost $18 million worth of fresh produce contracts, according to Alaska business estimates. For small and medium businesses, the blow was even harder. Data from the Alaska Economic Development Corporation showed that every day Anchorage stopped operating, the state's economy lost $9.8 million labor productivity and warehouse fees. Fishing firms in Kodiak Island, having taken short-term loans to outfit new boats, were immediately pushed to the brink of bankruptcy after 2 weeks of being unable to ship products to Japan. A seafood processing plant owner told Alaska Beacon that they had to sell off 200 tons of filet for a price barely enough to cover the cost of ice. The cruel irony was that the system once hailed as unbreakable revealed its weakest weld right when the entire nation depended on it. And the clearest proof lies in a seemingly small number. 6 people injured in the crash, none dead, but the economic shockwave reached nearly 50 countries along the Pacific Rim. The human tragedy was narrowly avoided by sheer luck, but the logistics catastrophe exposed the brutal truth. A maze of airplanes, ice, and misjudgments just a few seconds apart was enough to paralyze the beating heart of the North American transport system. A thick snowstorm blanketed Anchorage that night, turning the runway into a foggy sheet of glass streaked by a trail of fire. Firefighters rushed in, but the fire-suppressing foam had barely touched the DC-10's fuselage before it froze into a foamy block. Discharge valves jammed, and the spray nozzles iced over, just like the foam system failure at a Florida Air Force base when frozen water inside pipes burst valves and triggered an uncontrollable overflow. On the runway surface, already cracked by heat, even studded tire fire trucks skidded. The screech of metal on icy ground echoed under the pitch-black sky, lit only by flashing red beacons. The temperature outside was -17, yet the blast's heat melted snow beneath the plane's wheels, creating a network of jagged fissures that refroze, blistering the surface like scorched skin. These heaves and dips weren't new. The 2024 Western Alaska Airport Resiliency Study listed subsidence, longitudinal cracks, and alligatoring as top safety hazards for permafrost-based runways, especially after sudden freeze-thaw cycles. At the deepest cracks, thin ice coated the asphalt and crackled under the rescuers' boots, a chilling reminder that the ground beneath them could collapse at any moment. Faced with that, airport management deployed ground-penetrating radar, a technology FAA recommended to evaluate surface structure, detect thickness, and identify voids beneath without digging. A GPR-equipped truck slowly scanned runway 4R, and the monitor revealed thick, abnormal waveforms right beneath the scorched fuselage. The chief engineer immediately marked the area off and warned tankers to stay away due to risk of collapse and secondary explosion. Amid the chaos, a maintenance technician, who requested anonymity for fear of losing his job, whispered to a local reporter that the runway heat sensors had flagged overload multiple times during last year's cold waves, but the maintenance reports got stuck on the accounting desk because of budget cuts. Cross-checking revealed a 2001 U.S. Department of Transportation report had already warned that thaw-freeze cycles would drastically increase Alaska runway repair costs and raise risks of structural cracking. Yet the sensor upgrade plan had been postponed, and by the time fire licked the bitumen, all warnings had come too late. Climatologists immediately raised the question, was the explosion just the spark, or had climate change been the slow-burning fuse all along? Alaska now reports fewer days of continuous freeze, but more extreme temperature swings, making the permafrost beneath the runway expand and contract unpredictably, forming hidden voids. Combined with rescue equipment prone to freezing, the act of putting out the fire became a battle between man and nature, one humanity was losing on its own turf. When the smoke finally thinned, the GPR scan revealed 3 voids, over 20 meters long under the DC-10's tail section. Had the fuel-heavy fuselage skidded just a few meters further, The thin ice crust above might have caved in, swallowing fire trucks and crew. That fragility exposed a brutal paradox. Anchorage, the unbreakable logistical node of North America, was gambling its safety on a layer of Earth that's slowly melting beneath our feet. Could this be the final warning before climate and human complacency combine to form the next catastrophe? Just minutes after the blast, an 18-second clip capturing the moment the aircraft caught fire flooded Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube, triggering a massive snowball effect. Views shot past 3 million in 4 hours. The hashtag #Anchorage crash shot to the top trending spot in the U.S. local news outlets, quoted eyewitnesses saying, "The flames towered as high as airport light poles," sending viewers reeling back to the horrific 1983 incident where a Korean Air DC-10 veered onto the wrong runway and slammed into a Piper, leaving behind a fiery trail nearly half a kilometer long. That comparison sparked further panic. If the disaster 4 decades ago was horrifying, how serious was today's explosion, right at the world's 4th largest air cargo hub? From fear, social media veered into speculation. One group insisted it was a routine mechanical failure involving landing gear, citing NTSB stats that Anchorage averages 3 brake system malfunctions per year in icy conditions. But right beneath, a stream of comments hinted at sabotage. Why did the fire detection system delay by almost 10 seconds? Why did the foam cannon freeze up the moment it was activated? The top liked comment on r/aviation read, "Nothing about this adds up. This reeks of electronic interference." The strongest conspiracy centered on Anchorage's military ties. Few remembered that less than 3 kilometers from the civilian terminal stood Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, which houses C-17 loaded with polar research equipment. A 2023 Military Times analysis revealed the base serves as a sensitive arms transit hub during periods of rising tension in Asia. Once that tidbit was reshared online with the question, "Was that cargo jet carrying something classified?" thousands jumped to declare the event a staged accident to wipe something clean. By evening, the hashtag #Shadow incident emerged, hinting at a scenario where the aircraft's control system was remotely compromised. Several tech YouTubers cited GAO-23 105468, a report in which the U.S. Government Accountability Office warned that at least 6 cargo aircraft types still used internal Ethernet cabling, vulnerable to tampering if hackers accessed maintenance ports. Although the FAA swiftly denied any link to cyber attacks, the report became perfect evidence for netizens to argue the DC-10's rudder system could have been spoofed with just one malicious data packet. Adding fuel to the fire was a revelation about the surveillance cameras. KTVA's evening broadcast, citing airport security sources, reported that CCTV Pole 14 lost feed the exact moment the plane veered off the runway, only to return 2 minutes later. While airport officials explained it as thermal shock and NTSB refused to comment, the detail was enough for Redditors to claim someone pulled the plug to erase evidence. Simultaneously, the Alaska Wings aviation blog recalled warnings from ADSB experts about polar region interference, a phenomenon flagged for mitigation after minor collisions in 2021 in the same state, adding further weight to theories of electronic sabotage. Within 24 hours, over 50 million views, hundreds of analysis videos, and a flood of tweets painted a scenario so dark, it became impossible to separate fact from theory. Amid this data storm, one persistent question stuck with viewers. If this was just a random malfunction, then why did the cameras go dark, the foam freeze, and the radar data vanish all at the same exact second? Maybe, to find the real answer, we have to dig beneath Anchorage's frozen runway, where every crack might be hiding something far bigger than the explosion itself. One day after the explosion, international insurance companies simultaneously raised Arctic flight risk premiums by 12%, citing an Allianz commercial report stating that the 2024 aviation insurance market had surpassed $8 billion for the first time in 2 decades and would continue tightening until safety conditions are revalidated. The sudden price hike forced 3 major freight carriers on the Shanghai-Anchorage route to pull their winter schedules, rerouting through the South Pacific corridor, adding 4 hours of flight time and spiking fuel costs, which triggered a domino effect across the entire supply chain. The clearest consequences appeared in logistics firm calculations. Maersk warned its cold chain risk index had jumped into red, prompting emergency rerouting protocols. Fresh produce was stuffed into insulated containers, and semiconductor components were shifted to maritime routes to avoid Alaska's congested airspace. Meanwhile, Insurance Business Magazine reported that the series of crashes in early 2025, with Anchorage as the breaking point, was prompting a fundamental re-examination of how much the world relies on just a few critical air transit hubs. The reinsurance market had to set aside its highest contingency reserves since 9/11. Economic impact quickly trickled down into daily life. Alaska Economic Trends reported the state unemployment rate ticked up nearly a full percentage point in Q1 2025, surpassing post-pandemic job loss rates, as hundreds of cargo handlers and fuel truck drivers had their shifts cut due to the cargo traffic collapse. In Anchorage, dockside bands wove the Fire on Ice story into a song called Runway Zero to raise donations, while online communities launched the noxious Keep Alaska Moving campaign to support laid-off families. Elementary schools in the Mat-Su borough abruptly added a course called Cold Survival Basics, bringing in instructors from a popular winter survival program to teach kids how to build snow shelters and fire signal flares in case supply routes were ever severed. As the course organizer put it, this isn't a camping skill anymore, it's a life skill. Beyond the civilian sphere, the U.S. Air Force also incorporated the Anchorage incident into regimental-level emergency training, with special emphasis on the risk of losing control over supply chains when a single hub goes dark. That raised a pressing question now haunting global risk managers. When the entire network pumps through just a few logistical heart valves, could a single misstep on frozen tarmac paralyze the entire economic body? Are we trading speed and profit for dangerous fragility? The Anchorage accident wasn't merely a mechanical fault or a winter storm. It was a jolt to our blind trust in the global logistics system. We believe runways will always stay open, planes will always take off on time, and stores will always stock fresh goods. But every link in that chain is more fragile than we think. A broken landing gear, a frozen valve, a glitched line of code, each could bend the giant axis of the modern world, hurling millions into chaos within hours. If Anchorage, seen as the steel ice fortress of Arctic cargo, can be paralyzed this quickly, how many other choke points are silently cracking, just waiting to collapse? What do you think the real cause was? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Mind Gap so you won't miss our next journey into the world's deepest mysteries.